The hospital room was quiet, too quiet for a man whose voice once shook entire stadiums. The faint hum of fluorescent lights above could not mask the sound of heavy breathing. Beside the bed stood family members, frozen in disbelief, trying to hold on to the man who had once seemed immortal. Elvis Presley, the boy from Tupelo, who became the king of rock and roll, was facing his greatest battle. Not against a crowd, not against critics, but against time itself. This was not the roar of a concert, but the silence of fragility. And in that silence, the question echoed, how does a legend prepare for goodbye? To understand this moment, to feel its weight, you must first remember the journey. Elvis was not born into luxury, nor did he come from privilege. He was the child of working-class parents, raised in a small shotgun house in Mississippi. He grew up with little more than music in his heart and dreams in his eyes. His rise to fame was meteoric, a climb so fast it left even him breathless. One moment, he was a truck driver, shy and unassuming. The next, he was the voice of a generation, the rebel shaking his hips on live television, the idol parents warned their children about, and the hope of those who saw themselves in a poor southern boy made good. But with fame came pressure, and with pressure came battles hidden from the public eye. Elvis was not just a singer, he became a cultural icon, a man carrying the weight of America's shifting identity during the 1950s and 1960s. He gave his soul to his music, his energy to his fans, and his body to the stage. Yet behind the curtain, Elvis was fragile, haunted by loneliness, burdened by expectations, and torn between the boy he once was and the image the world demanded he maintain. And then came the moment that would shake his world, the loss of his mother, Gladys. She was not only the foundation of his family, but also his anchor, his confidant, and his greatest source of comfort. When she died in 1958, Elvis's grief was profound, raw, and unfiltered. In many ways, that loss marked the beginning of a slow unraveling. The king of rock and roll was adored by millions, but at the core, he remained a boy longing for his mother's steady hand. From that point on, every triumph, every performance, and every accolade carried with it a shadow of sorrow. This is the story we are here to tell. Not just the performances, not just the records, not even the scandals. This is the human story of Elvis Presley, a story of love and loss, of resilience and vulnerability, a story about how even legends can break, and how, sometimes, what the world sees on stage is only half the truth. By the end of this journey, you may never look at Elvis the same way again. Before Elvis Presley became a name etched into history, he was simply a boy from Tupelo, Mississippi. The Presleys lived in poverty, in a two-room shotgun house built by his father and uncle. The walls were thin, the floorboards creaked, and food was never guaranteed. Vernon and Gladys Presley struggled to provide, but what they lacked in wealth, they made up for in devotion to their only son. For young Elvis, music was not a luxury, it was a lifeline. He absorbed the soulful hymns of the church, the aching melodies of the blues drifting from nearby porches, and the raw energy of country radio. These sounds fused in his heart, creating a style no one could yet define. Elvis was shy, almost painfully so. In school, he was often overlooked, labeled as odd because of his quiet nature and his love for music that crossed racial boundaries. While other boys dreamed of football glory or factory jobs, Elvis strummed his cheap guitar, practicing chords until his fingers blistered. His classmates could not see it yet, but beneath the soft voice and polite manners was a storm waiting to break. Music was his escape from hardship, but it was also his rebellion, his way of saying that life would not keep him small forever. By the time the family moved to Memphis, Tennessee, Elvis had grown into a young man carrying both hope and hesitation. Memphis was alive with sound. Beale Street pulsed with rhythm and blues. Gospel soared from churches, and country music echoed from the radios of passing cars. Elvis listened, learned, and absorbed. He admired artists like B.B. King, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, and Hank Snow. He was not trying to imitate them. He was searching for something new, something that belonged entirely to him. "I just sang the way I felt," he would later say, and that feeling was what separated him from every other voice on the radio. In 1953, at the age of 18, Elvis walked into Sun Records to record a song for his mother. That small act, born out of love and devotion, would alter the course of music forever. Sam Phillips, the visionary behind Sun Records, did not see it immediately. At first, Elvis seemed nervous, almost unsure of himself. But when he loosened up, when he fused gospel fire with blues grit and country soul, Phillips heard what no one else had heard before, the sound of a new America. It was not black, it was not white, it was something in between, something that spoke to everyone. That was the birth of rock and roll. The rise was sudden and overwhelming. Within months, Elvis was catapulted from obscurity to stardom. Girls screamed, parents panicked, and preachers condemned him. His swiveling hips were called sinful, his voice too provocative, his presence too dangerous. Yet that danger was exactly what drew people in. To a generation of young Americans, Elvis was freedom personified, the permission to feel, to rebel, and to live outside the rules their parents had enforced. Elvis Presley has no right to sing like that. One critic sneered, but the youth of America disagreed. They saw in him not just a performer, but a reflection of themselves. Yet fame came at a price. Every stage he conquered took something from him. Every headline twisted his image into something larger than life, but also something less than human. Fans adored him, but they did not see the sleepless nights, the isolation of hotel rooms, the endless expectations pressing down on his shoulders. Elvis was trapped in a paradox. He had everything he had ever dreamed of, yet at times it felt like he had nothing at all. His music reached millions, but his heart ached for peace, for simplicity, for something real in a world that constantly demanded more. It was in these early years that the seeds of his later struggles were planted. The world saw the king, but inside, Elvis remained the boy from Tupelo, still chasing approval, still trying to live up to promises made to himself and to his mother. Gladys, his anchor, worried endlessly about him. She saw the strain behind his smile, the exhaustion in his eyes. "Don't let them change you, Elvis," she would remind him. But fame does not ask for permission. It consumes, and as the applause grew louder, so did the silence that followed once the lights went out. The world could not get enough of Elvis Presley, but behind the glamour and the sold-out arenas, cracks were beginning to show. Fame, as intoxicating as it was, became both a blessing and a burden. By the late 1950s, Elvis had achieved everything most could only dream of. Yet he remained restless, caught between the relentless demands of the public and his own private struggles. The screaming fans adored him, but the critics sharpened their knives, branding him a menace to morality. In the eyes of many, he was both savior and sinner, a contradiction he carried like a weight on his chest. In 1958, just as his career reached its peak, Elvis's world was shaken in ways he could not prepare for. First came the draft notice. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, would now serve as a soldier in the United States Army. For his fans, it was unthinkable. How could the most famous man in America trade his guitar for a rifle? Yet Elvis accepted it with quiet dignity. "It's my duty," he said simply. He wanted to prove that fame did not make him immune from responsibility. But beneath that sense of duty, there was fear. He knew the military would strip him of the stage, of the music that defined him, and of the identity he had fought so hard to create. And then, just as he prepared to leave, tragedy struck. His mother Gladys, his lifelong anchor, fell gravely ill. The woman who had believed in him when no one else did, the woman whose voice steadied him through doubt, was slipping away. Elvis rushed to her side, but fate was cruel. Gladys Presley died at just 46 years old, and with her passing, something inside Elvis shattered. Witnesses recalled him crying uncontrollably, collapsing onto her coffin, begging, "Oh God, everything I have is gone." For a man worshipped by millions, the loss was deeply personal, a wound that fame could not heal. In many ways, the Elvis the world knew, the vibrant, carefree rebel, was buried alongside his mother. When Elvis entered the army shortly after her death, he did so not as a superstar but as a grieving son. The world saw a uniformed celebrity making headlines in Germany, but behind the cameras he struggled to find meaning. He was lonely, depressed, and unmoored. It was during this time that he began experimenting with pills, first to stay awake, then to sleep, then to numb the ache that never truly left him. What started as coping became dependence, and dependence became a shadow that followed him for the rest of his life. Yet, even in grief, Elvis remained a phenomenon. When he returned from service in 1960, the world was waiting. His comeback was triumphant. Movies, albums, television appearances, all consumed by fans desperate for more. But the man who returned was not the same as the one who had left. He smiled for the cameras, but those closest to him noticed the changes. He was moodier, more withdrawn, and increasingly reliant on the very pills that gave him temporary relief. Hollywood adored him, but film after film reduced him to a caricature, a box office draw stripped of the raw energy that had once made him dangerous. By the mid-1960s, Elvis was frustrated. The movies were lucrative, but they felt empty. His music was losing its edge, drowned in formulaic scripts and forgettable soundtracks. Critics dismissed him as a relic of the past, a star fading in the shadow of new acts like the Beatles. For Elvis, who had once redefined music itself, this decline was devastating. He longed for artistry, for respect, for a chance to prove that he was more than a face on a poster. "I want to do something that matters," he confided to those close to him. The tension between his public image and private desires was becoming unbearable. Then came the spark that reignited him, the 1968 comeback special, dressed in black leather, standing before a live audience. Elvis reclaimed his throne. It was raw, electric, and filled with the fire that had once made him untouchable. In that moment, he was not just the king of rock and roll, he was a man reborn. The critics who had written him off were silenced, and the fans who had drifted returned in awe. Yet even this victory carried its own burden. For every high there was a looming low, and Elvis knew that staying on top was harder than getting there. The tension between who he was and who the world wanted him to be only grew sharper with every passing year. This was the paradox of Elvis Presley, the man who could set a stage ablaze but struggled to find light in his own life. He was at the height of his powers, yet the cracks beneath the surface were deepening. Fame had given him everything, but it demanded more than any one man could give, and as the 1970s approached, the stage was set for the greatest battle of his life, not against music, not against rivals, but against himself. The 1970s marked both the triumph and the unraveling of Elvis Presley. On stage, he was larger than life, commanding sold-out arenas in a way no one had before. His residency in Las Vegas became legendary, an endless stream of flashing lights, roaring applause, and women reaching out just to touch the hem of his jumpsuit. He was adored, worshipped, and immortalized in every note he sang. But off stage, the king was crumbling. The world saw the white rhinestone jumpsuits, the sweat-soaked scarves, and the thunder of his voice. But few saw the man who staggered backstage, exhausted, often unable to stand without the aid of his entourage. At the center of this unraveling was a relationship that shaped, and in many ways doomed, his later years. Colonel Tom Parker. To the public, Parker was Elvis's brilliant manager, the man who had taken a shy Southern boy and turned him into a global icon. But behind the scenes, Parker was controlling, manipulative, and ruthless. His deals made Parker rich while binding Elvis to an endless cycle of shows, movies, and contracts that stripped him of freedom. Parker was not interested in Elvis's well-being, only in squeezing every possible dollar from him. "The Colonel always has a plan," Elvis once remarked with a weary smile, but those closest to him knew that plan often came at Elvis's expense. Elvis longed to tour internationally, to perform in places like London and Tokyo, where millions of fans begged for a chance to see him. But Parker refused, citing logistical issues that were, in truth, tied to his own past and immigration status. Elvis never left North America, not because he did not want to, but because Parker would not let him. That dream of showing the world who he truly was remained unfulfilled, another wound that gnawed at him in silence. The toll of this suffocating cycle became visible. By the mid-70s, Elvis's health was deteriorating rapidly. The pills he had once used sparingly had become a necessity. Uppers to wake him, downers to sleep, painkillers to numb his body. He was trapped in a haze, performing through fogged vision, slurred words, and a body that was failing him. His once chiseled frame grew bloated, his movements sluggish, yet when the lights hit, something miraculous still happened. He transformed. For those precious hours, he was again the king, pouring out every ounce of himself to the audience. But the cost was staggering. Each performance left him weaker, emptier, and further from the boy who once sang in his mother's kitchen. The breaking point came in the final years, when even his closest friends began to fear for his life. He would lock himself in his Graceland bathroom for hours, emerging dazed, sometimes not at all. His daughter, Lisa Marie, saw only glimpses of her father, tender, loving, but haunted. Priscilla, though divorced from him, remained one of the few who understood his pain. She later said, "Elvis didn't have a normal life. He didn't really know who to trust. He gave everything on stage, but off stage he was lost." And yet even as his health spiraled, Elvis continued to perform. The fans still screamed, still reached out, still wept at the sound of his voice. But there was a growing sense of tragedy in the air, as if the audience knew they were watching a man fighting not just for his career, but for his very existence. In June 1977, during one of his final televised performances, Elvis sat at a piano and sang Unchained Melody. His hands trembled, his face was swollen, but his voice, it soared, defiant and full of the old magic. The audience rose to their feet, tears streaming, not realizing they were witnessing his farewell. 2 months later, on August 16, 1977, the world awoke to the unthinkable. Elvis Presley was dead at just 42 years old. The news rippled across the globe, leaving fans in shock, disbelief and mourning. How could the man who seemed eternal, who had given so much of himself, be gone? Graceland became a shrine overnight, with tens of thousands gathering to pay their respects. Strangers clung to each other in grief, united by the loss of a man who had been more than a singer. He had been hope, rebellion, love, and escape all at once. The climax of Elvis's story was not a single concert, not a final performance, but the cruel reality that even legends can fall. His death was not just the loss of a musician, it was the end of an era. For millions, it was the day music itself seemed to pause, leaving only silence where once there had been fire. And in that silence, the world asked, how did a man who gave so much end so tragically alone? The death of Elvis Presley sent shockwaves across the globe, but it was the aftermath that revealed just how deeply he had imprinted himself onto the human soul. The world had lost a star, but his fans felt they had lost a piece of themselves. Graceland became more than a mansion. It transformed into a pilgrimage site. Thousands of people poured through its gates in the days following his death, some collapsing in grief, others singing his songs through tears. The air was heavy with sorrow, but also with disbelief. For many, Elvis was not supposed to die. Legends were meant to live forever. The funeral was a spectacle unlike any other. Fans lined the streets of Memphis as Elvis's body was carried in a white casket, draped in flowers. Reporters estimated over 80,000 mourners gathered, stretching for miles in sweltering heat, united by grief. Some screamed his name, others whispered prayers, and many simply stood in silence, unable to process the reality before them. The king was gone, but his reign lingered in every voice that sang "Love Me Tender" under the hot August sky. That day was not just a farewell, it was a reckoning with the fragility of human greatness. In the months that followed, the Presley family wrestled with a storm of emotions. Priscilla, though no longer his wife, remained deeply connected to Elvis, not only through their daughter Lisa Marie, but through years of shared struggle and love. She became the guardian of his legacy, ensuring that the world would remember the man as well as the myth. Lisa Marie, only 9 years old at the time, faced the impossible reality of growing up without the father she adored. She later recalled moments of tenderness, of him tucking her in at night, singing softly until she fell asleep. To her, he was not the king, he was simply daddy. That was the man she lost. As the years passed, the shadow of Elvis's death gave way to the light of his legacy. His influence seeped into every corner of music, shaping generations that followed. Without Elvis, there might not have been the Beatles, nor countless artists who cited him as the spark that ignited their passion. His ability to blend gospel, blues, and country into something raw and universal had changed the course of popular culture. Even in his flaws, his humanity resonated. Fans remembered not only the power of his voice, but the vulnerability of his spirit. But the aftermath was not without controversy. Questions about his death swirled. Was it simply heart failure, or had the years of prescription drugs finally taken their toll? Tabloids ran wild, painting pictures of excess and decline, threatening to overshadow the truth of his artistry. Yet for those who loved him, these details mattered little. They did not want to remember the man who stumbled. They wanted to remember the man who stood tall on stage, guitar in hand, radiating a kind of joy that could not be faked. Graceland became the answer. In 1982, Priscilla Presley opened its doors to the public, preserving it as a memorial and museum. What began as a family home became one of the most visited private residences in the world, second only to the White House. Fans walked through its rooms not to gawk, but to connect. Each corner told a story: the music room where Elvis rehearsed, the jungle room with its eccentric decor, the racquetball court where he played just hours before his death. Graceland was no longer just Elvis's home. It was the bridge between legend and humanity, allowing fans to step into his world and see him not just as a star, but as a man. The aftermath of Elvis's passing revealed something profound. His death did not end his story, it amplified it. His music continues to sell, his image continues to inspire, and his name continues to evoke reverence. Decades later, young fans who never saw him live discover his songs and feel as if he is singing directly to them. That is the mark of true greatness, a voice that outlives its vessel, a spirit that refuses to fade. And yet, in all the tributes and celebrations, one truth lingers: Elvis Presley was not invincible. He was human, vulnerable, and flawed. His struggles with loneliness, addiction, and expectation make his story not one of perfection, but of resilience. That humanity, more than anything, is why his legacy endures. The world did not just lose a performer in 1977, it lost a reminder of how high dreams can soar and how heavy their cost can be. In the end, Elvis's aftermath was not only about loss, it was about rediscovery. The king may have left the stage, but his echo remains, eternal, reminding us that greatness is not about living forever. It is about leaving something behind that never dies. Elvis Presley's story is more than the tale of a man who sang his way from a shotgun house in Tupelo to the throne of rock and roll. It is the story of a human being, brilliant, flawed, vulnerable, who carried the weight of a world that adored him, yet often misunderstood him. His life reminds us that greatness always comes at a cost, and that even the brightest stars burn out too soon. But in burning out, they leave behind a light that guides generations to come. Elvis did not just change music, he changed culture itself. He shattered barriers, blending sounds that others tried to keep apart. He gave young people a voice in an era desperate for rebellion. He made America look at itself differently, through race, through art, through freedom of expression. Yet for all his cultural impact, the heart of Elvis was simple: a son who loved his mother, a father who cherished his daughter, and a man who longed for peace in a world that would never let him rest. That is the paradox of Elvis Presley, the king and the boy, the legend and the man forever intertwined. His story also forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. The price of fame can be devastating. The expectations of millions can crush even the strongest among us. Elvis's struggles with addiction and isolation are not just celebrity gossip. They are reminders of the fragility that exists beneath even the most powerful voices. He gave everything to the world, and in return, the world took more than it should have. Yet, even in his struggles, he never stopped giving. Every performance, even in his darkest days, carried with it a piece of his soul. And so, more than 4 decades after his passing, Elvis remains with us. His music is still played, his concerts still watched, his image still iconic. But beyond the jumpsuits, beyond the headlines, there is a lesson for us all: to honor the humanity within the legend, to remember that greatness is not about perfection, but about courage. The courage to create, to inspire, to give. Elvis had that courage in abundance. As you reflect on his story, ask yourself, what does it mean to live a life that outlasts you? For Elvis, it meant giving his voice, his heart, and his spirit to millions. For us, it may mean something simpler: loving fiercely, creating boldly, and leaving behind something that matters. That is the true, untold legacy of Elvis Presley. If this story moved you, share it. Keep the conversation alive. Elvis's journey is not just his, it belongs to all of us who have ever dreamed, ever struggled, ever reached for something greater than ourselves. Subscribe to this channel, join this community, and together we will continue to honor the lives and legacies of those who shaped our world. Because legends never truly die, they live on in us, in our stories, and in our voices.